Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to speak from the dispatch box for the first time today under your chairmanship.
Many.
And I look forward to this being the first of many debates in this chamber with the Minister opposite. Now, I'll firstly address the Government's amendments, but we'll focus upon speaking broadly later on to our amendments on vehicle excise duty. Now, on the whole, the Government's amendments are technical in nature, designed to preserve the integrity of the bill, comply with EU law and to close loopholes. And on this basis, we broadly support the measures, but I will make a few comments. In particular, the explanatory notes and impact assessments relating to these measures were only provided by the Government at 11:50 a.m. this morning. Now, given the very detailed nature of the changes proposed, this simply does not allow sufficient time for scrutiny. The Honourable Member for Hereford and South Herefordshire has already raised this point, and KPMG have also voiced their concerns, stating that it is important that the Government is seen to follow the process consistently and provide suitable time for consultation and parliamentary scrutiny wherever possible. The addition of entirely new measures to the Summer Finance Bill so late in its passage through the Commons is likely to foster only uncertainty. I do hope that the Minister will take my concerns and the concerns of other honourable members into account and ensure that this doesn't happen again. Now, moving on to the clauses themselves. New Clause 4, as we heard, excludes certain contractual activities relating to reserve electricity generation capacity available from the scope of venture capital trusts. These amendments are required simply in order to comply with EU state aid rules, along with Amendments 31 to 45 and 46 to 70. Moving on to New Clause 5, this relates to corporation tax instalment payments and corrects a legislative defect that has caused uncertainty previously regarding how the legislation will apply for accounting periods that run over the 1st of April 2015. New Clause 6 relates to carried interest and disguised investment management fees. These are technical corrections to Clause 40, which are meant to ensure that where carried interest is charged to tax under the Capital Gains Tax Code, the full economic gain is brought into charge to tax. This new clause is intended to prevent sums arising to a fund manager as investment management fees or carried interest being sheltered from tax through arrangements that have the effect that the amounts arise to other persons. New Clause 8, as we've heard, relates to restitution interest payments and introduces a new rate of corporation tax on amounts of restitution interest which may be paid by HMRC under a claim relating to the payment of tax on a mistake of law or unlawful collection of tax. The interest element of a restitution award will be chargeable to corporation tax at a special rate of 45% instead of the normal 20% rate. Now, while we broadly support this, the Minister will be aware of the hostile views expressed by some businesses, and the Minister may wish to take the opportunity to respond to these today. Moving on to New Clause 3. This requires that the Chancellor lays a report setting out proposals for amending the law to ensure that no element of the remuneration aid to an investment fund manager may be treated as a capital gain and that such remuneration shall be treated as income for tax purposes. We do agree with the general aims of the new clause, but we will listen very carefully to what the Minister has to say on this issue. I will now move on to vehicle excise duty and the proposed amendments for the bulk of my contribution. Now, as honourable members are aware, this clause relates to the rates of vehicle excise duty, or VED as I shall refer to it, for light passenger vehicles in the UK. The measure considerably flattens out the rates for VAD by introducing a flat rate excise charge for every single vehicle, regardless of CO2 emissions, from the 1st of April 2017. First year rates will continue to be determined by a sliding scale depending on CO2 emissions. Most greener cars, which emit below 120 grams of CO2 per kilometre, now pay VAD in the first year of up to £160, whereas previously they paid nothing. Only zero-emission cars will still pay zero VAD. In subsequent years, there will be a flat rate of VAD of £140 a year. Honourable members will note that this will result in a substantial VED increase for low-emission cars in the first and subsequent years, whilst there is a substantial reduction for those which are less carbon efficient. Previously, VED for subsequent years was banded with the more polluting cars paying more, up to £505. Now clearly, over time this strongly benefits more polluting cars which pay hundreds of pounds a year less, whilst greener cars, say for those zero-emission cars, pay about £100 a year more. Now, to put this into perspective, approximately 445 cars are currently in the top least polluting bands and so pay no VAD at all, as they emit less than 100 grams of CO2 per kilometre. Under the proposed changes, only 13 will fall into the exempt category. This is a significant drop. In addition to these proposals, there are also moves to additionally penalise vehicles priced £40,000. And over time, there will also be a supplementary rate of £310 for the first 5 years. Now, a tax on passenger vehicles has been a feature of government policy since as far back as 1889. However, it's important to note that it was the Labour government in 1999 who introduced bans of vehicle excise duty linked to the levels of CO2 emissions for the vehicle in question. Now, the measure was designed to encourage the purchase and use of more fuel-efficient and low-emission vehicles, with the aim of lessening the environmental impact of an ever-increasing number of cars on the road. Now, there is broad consensus on all sides of the House that vehicle excise duty reform is needed. Greener, more carbon-efficient vehicles are slowly becoming more commonplace across the UK, and this will undoubtedly have clear implications for VED as a future source of government revenue. VED bans were set up in 2008 when the average emission was 158 grams of CO2 per kilometre, whereas now the average car is now at 125 grams. So many cars pay no VAD at all. Honourable members on this side agree with the government that this is unsustainable. However, we question whether the approach they have taken to address this issue is indeed a pragmatic one. We do not agree that increasing the duty paid on low-emission cars whilst decreasing duty paid on higher-emission cars is the logical solution. The fact that zero-emission vehicles will continue to be exempt from road tax is welcomed. However, we are concerned that a flat rate of VED, as outlined in this clause, will mean that low-emission vehicles over a period of 7 years will now pay £800 to £1,000 more than they do now, whilst at the same time many high-emission vehicles are expected to pay up to £440 less over the same period. Now, as I will give way.
Related to giving way and congratulate her on her debut at the dispatch box. I hope we'll be looking across in precisely this direction for many years to come. However, I wondered whether she could give at least some thought to what was said by the Minister here, that there is obviously a delicate balance. On the one hand, trying to encourage people to have low-emission vehicles. And I should perhaps say that it's not just carbon dioxide, but nitrous dioxide that is increasingly seen as being a problem that I'm afraid that, none of this legislation properly addresses. But also to try and ensure that relatively well-off people who maybe have to hang on to a car for many, many years shouldn't also be artificially penalised. Does she not recognise that the balance that the government have tried to put into place is at least a sensible one?
Well, I welcome the honourable member for his comments, and he's certainly a silver-tongued fox, and I look forward to staring at him on these benches in the months to come. He raises some important issues, and hopefully throughout the duration of my speech I will address those points. I'll make a little progress if you don't mind, and then I'll take interventions later on. I'd like to cite an example of the absurdity of the current proposals, and whilst I address your point, I appreciate and agree that VED does need to be reformed and it is unsustainable in its current form. The current proposals create the obvious absurdity of a Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid owing as much VED as a BMW 5 Series saloon from year 2. Now, on top of this, many vehicles which harness the latest technological developments tend to be rather expensive and may be hit by the supplementary rates as well as the higher flat rate. For instance, the Volvo V60 plug-in hybrid estate, a hybrid suitable for families, would have to pay a first-year rate of £320 and a supplementary rate of £450 a year for 5 years thereafter, despite being at the forefront of low-emission technology. Now, whilst the government's proposals to make zero-emission cars completely exempt are certainly welcomed, honourable members on this side of the House do question whether we are likely to see a radical shift towards completely zero-carbon vehicles in the near future. Indeed, my scouring of motor magazines and blog sites in preparation for this debate led me to one clear conclusion. Whilst people travelling short distances might be happy to rely upon, say, an electric vehicle, plug-in hybrids still appear to be the main option considered by the more discerning green consumer, who wants reliability and green credentials rolled into one. Now, members will no doubt be aware that hybrids are cars that have both a regular engine and an electric motor, and the beauty of them is that you can drive short distances and never use any fuel. An electric range of about 20 to 30 miles is common, but when longer journeys are required, the petrol or diesel engine kicks in to provide the comfort and security that you won't get caught short. Now, of course, we are making amazing technological advances every day. Electrical vehicles are becoming more and more efficient and suitable for longer journeys. And as a result, I have no doubt that public opinion may change quickly in the years to come. But when assessing VAD in the light of encouraging the purchase of more greener cars from 2017 onwards, I would be more inclined to trust current consumer viewpoints rather than a hypothetical chocolate box vision of the future, where simply as a result of VAD having an exemption solely for zero-emissions vehicles, there is a sudden stampede of people going out to buy them. Clearly, a more pragmatic approach is required, and we have serious concerns on this side of the House that these changes, together with the freeze-in fuel duty announced in the budget, though let me be clear, that was a welcome announcement, will dissuade people from purchasing all other bands of low-emission vehicles in the future. Now, we're certainly not alone in harbouring these concerns. Whilst the government has claimed that the clause strengthens incentives to purchase low-emission cars, key players in the industry would disagree. The RAC, whilst welcoming the government's proposal to ring-fence VAD in the creation of the Road Fund, also stated that a big question mark remains, however, over how the new changes will affect people's inclination to buy low carbon dioxide emitting fuel-efficient vehicles. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, whilst again welcoming VAD reform, stated that the new regime will disincentivise take-up of low-emission vehicles. The AA, again welcoming reform, called for further measures to sit alongside the government's proposals to offer fiscal encouragement for converting the main urban emissions polluters to hybrid or electric alternatives. Now, leaving the environmental impact of this clause to one side for a moment, car manufacturers have expressed concern that the supplementary rate for cars worth over £40,000 will have a profoundly negative effect on car manufacturing in Britain. The UK has a proud history of producing premium vehicles, which are now likely to be the subject of the supplement rate of £310 a year. Now, car manufacturing is one of the few heavy industries remaining in the UK, and with regard to the government's negligence at work such as Redcar acting as a backdrop, we do not feel that the government has set out a clear argument on the issue of the premium vehicle supplement to allay, firstly, the concerns raised by car manufacturers, and secondly, to provide comfort that the government is committed to promoting long-term growth within the industry. Indeed, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders has warned that the UK car industry supports almost 800,000 jobs, and a punitive tax on these premium vehicles will almost certainly impact domestic demand, thus affecting growth in UK manufacturing. As I've outlined, my honourable friends on this side of the House are concerned that this clause, as drafted, will discourage the manufacture and purchase of low-emission vehicles. We also appreciate that whilst it may increase exchequer revenue in the longer term, it will potentially have a detrimental impact on car manufacturing in the UK. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is for the reasons I've outlined that we have tabled amendments which will encourage the manufacture and purchase of low-emission vehicles and also preserve exchequer revenue as lower-emission cars are purchased. This is achieved by front-loading VED for the first 3 years with a reduced taper rate thereafter and dependent on a sliding scale of CO2 emissions. The Honourable Member for South West Hertfordshire cited research in committee that consumers' choices are more influenced by the immediate cost and thus he reasoned an increase in first-year rate was sufficient to influence behaviour. Logically then, front-loading VED for the first 3 years, as we have done, will have a greater influence on consumer behaviour and encourage the purchase of greener vehicles. We've also scrapped the punitive regime for cars over £40,000. I've no doubt that the Minister and all honourable members today wish to encourage the manufacture and purchase of low-emission vehicles, whilst at the same time increasing growth within the car manufacturing industry and increasing exchequer revenue. As such, this is achievable if our amendments are agreed today, and I would urge honourable members to support them today. Thank you.